Hey again, this is Matt from Sagebrush Coffee. Today I want to talk a little bit about dark roasts. So this is the third in a three-part series about roast color. And I want to talk a little bit about how Sagebrush Coffee does a dark roast, because I think this is going to help a lot of confusion and hopefully help some of our customers know what they're getting before they buy it. So I highly encourage you to listen to this all the way to the end so that you can help understand a little bit about what you're looking at when you look on Sagebrush Coffee's website and you try to decide whether you're going to get a light, dark, or medium roast coffee, or even a coffee from us at all. Because I really don't want you to get a coffee that you don't like because you didn't know what you were really buying. That's the key to all of these posts, is I want to help you, the customer, understand what kind of coffees we offer and how to pick a coffee that's going to meet your palate and meet what you really want. Before I talk about a dark roast, and this is probably redundant if you've been watching the series, but I want to talk a little bit about the roasting process. When you roast coffee, there's 2 points within the coffee roasting process. There's the first crack, which happens somewhere after the coffee really starts to take on its flavor. And then there's a period of time where that first crack kind of completes. And if you think of it like popcorn popping, and then after the popcorn pops or the coffee pops, there's a period of time that's kind of just a quiet period, which is where the coffee develops various flavors. And so I think, I talked in my light roast blog about somewhere within that first crack is what we call a light roast. Roasting doesn't always correlate to the color of the coffee, light, medium, and dark. It really correlates to the amount of time the coffee was roasting. And I think that's super important to think about, because we might have a bean that we roast what we call dark, but the bean itself just isn't that dark, and we're not going to char it to make it look dark. And so don't really associate light, medium, and dark roasts with the color. Associate them with this timeline on the roasting process. And so then you've got that gap between the first crack and the second crack, and within that gap is really where the medium roast comes in. And then you have the second crack. And so if you think about it like popcorn, you've got the outer shell of the bean that's popping in the first crack, and then you've got an inner shell of the bean that's popping in the second. So it's much more faint, but it really if you think about it, it's almost like cooked through. There's more depth to what's roasted, and so logically, it's going to be richer and more bold in flavor. So that's kind of your difference between the roasting process from light to dark. If we think about that in terms of what's roasted, why has everyone roasted for years and years and years coffee that is super dark? The answer to that question really is coffee was kind of terrible. It used to be really bad. Really good coffee, specialty coffee, is kind of a new thing. 20, 30 years ago, there wasn't that much great coffee, and coffee has grown leaps and bounds in the last 15 years in terms of what quality coffee is. Back in the day, coffee companies learned, hey, if I roast some of the bad out of this coffee, people like it better. If there's bad, dirty flavors or inconsistencies in the coffee, or the soil that it was grown in wasn't very good and it's not a very high quality coffee, you roast it far enough and you start to lose the flavor of the bean itself and pick up that roasty, smoky flavor, which is really just covering up bad coffee. When you think about it that way, it's really hard to roast something dark and take a high-end specialty coffee and roast it dark, and you're roasting some of what makes it great out of the coffee. And that's not what we want to do at Sagebrush. Kind of spoiler alert there on where I'm going with this. And so a key point is flavor doesn't match color. Dark coffee is generally covering up or trying to take away some of the flavor that's built into the bean itself. And so what does a coffee process have to do with a coffee roasting? So I've talked a little bit about coffee processing in the past. I've talked about dry process, washed coffees, and honey processed coffees. When we take that into account as we're roasting coffee, it has a very big impact on what a coffee is going to taste like, whether it's light, medium, or dark roast. I'll start with washed coffees. They're the most common. My personal preference is to have a washed coffee be usually medium to light. A washed coffee as a darker roast coffee, feel like you just start to lose what makes it great. So very rarely will I take a washed coffee up to that second crack. That second crack is really when you start to develop that darker roast flavor. A dry process coffee is an interesting one because fruit flavors within a dry processed coffee are really good when it's roasted super light. and you draw out the fruitiness. But sometimes a dry processed coffee has a great, rich, chocolatey flavor to it. And I like to roast that chocolatiness into it, which means you have to push it a little further into the roast and take it to what we would call a dark roast at that second crack. I do that a lot with Brazilian coffees. I think a natural processed Brazilian coffee almost always has this perfect chocolate flavor when it's roasted dark. I do that a lot with some Ethiopian coffees. You'll see a lot of Ethiopian dry processes that I love to have super light to get the fruit flavor, but a dark roasted Ethiopian dry process makes some of the best espresso I've ever had in my life. I really kind of hit on either side of that pendulum with dry process. And then honey is a sweeter cup of coffee. I'm really trying to decide whether I want just kind of a sweet note in the front and there's other things going on, or if that sweetness kind of likes to turn into a more caramely flavor. And if it does, then I like to push it a little bit later into the roast to have it develop a caramel flavor. This year, at the time of recording this vlog, the El Salvador Loma La Gloria coffee, the red honey, I just think it's a phenomenal caramely cup of coffee when you get it past that medium into the dark roast. So that's what I like to do. One more note before I kind of push a little bit more on what Sagebrush does in terms of dark coffee is a lot of people have this thought that the darker the coffee, the more caffeine. That's actually a misnomer. Caffeine content in coffee kind of connects to the varietal, but more than anything else, it's connected to the weight and the amount of coffee you use. When you roast coffee longer, you're roasting more humidity out of the coffee. If you brew by weight, then that's going to make a difference. You're going to use more coffee because the coffee itself weighs less, and therefore you're going to get more caffeine. But if you brew by volume, a quarter cup, a teaspoon, however you'd like to select your coffee, then the weight has no impact and the roast level doesn't have an impact. And so just be aware of that when you're roasting and when you're deciding how much to brew. That also kind of dictates the richness of a coffee. Like if there's less water content in the coffee because it's been roasted a little bit longer, you're going to use more coffee to get the same amount of weight. And so you'll think that a coffee is more rich than it is. But that's strictly because you're physically using more coffee to get the same amount of weight. That has as much of an impact on flavor as anything. So what does Sagebrush coffee do? We'll never roast anything what a lot of people will call dark. One, I'm not very good at it. My palate doesn't like dark coffees, and I can't figure out how to make a dark coffee taste unique and good versus just any coffee. And so if I take an average coffee bean and some of the premium stuff that I try to get my hands on, roast them to a dark level, I just can't tell that much of a difference. It all tastes kind of burned to me. And so I don't want to sell coffee at the premium price that we sell it at Sagebrush when I can't personally taste the difference. We very rarely roast something to the oily darkness, which if you go read, we've got a blog post that talks about what makes a coffee bean oily. I'm going to be recording another video for that one. But I don't like to go to the oily level. I don't really like to go through the second crack. Occasionally we'll touch the second crack, but usually the goal is right as soon as you start to get to that second crack on a dark roast coffee, that's when you drop the roast. That's when you drop the beans and feel like that's when I can get the best richness and bold flavors and the more chocolate forward instead of fruit forward flavors out of a coffee bean. If you're looking for a good, rich, super strong cup of coffee that has that smoky flavor, I think some of the national chains call it roasty. I'm not quite sure what that means other than burned, but if you look for that roasty flavor, frankly, don't come to Sagebrush because that's not what we offer. What we offer in terms of dark roast coffees generally are better, more rich, more chocolatey flavored coffees that come out of that getting right up to that second crack. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this post. Go ahead and like or subscribe below. We'd love to get more traffic on this video blog. We're trying to grow what we're doing here. I'm trying to post every couple of weeks, and that'll give you a notification for what we're doing. And really this whole point of this is to help inform you so that you can make a better buying decision, whether it's at Sagebrush or somewhere else. Thanks.